Vortigern, the treacherous and tyrannical king of the Britons, was at long last dead. Aurelius Ambrosius had been crowned the new king, but a great challenge awaited him. During Vortigern's reign, much of the Isle had been lost to the Saxon invaders. It would be up to Aurelius, the new king, alongside his brother Uther, to reclaim the rightful lands of the Britons. As it happened, word of the king's death spread quickly, and soon Hengist of the Saxons heard the news. The man felt fear when he learned that Aurelius now led the Britons, for he had gained great renown as a warrior whilst fighting in Gaul. Therefore, Hengist brought his armies north, beyond the Humber, seeking support of the Picts in Scotland to deal a decisive blow against the Britons. Aurelius felt his spirits rise upon hearing news of the fear of the Saxons, and marched his own forces to face them. When they arrived, both armies drew up for battle. Aurelius stationed a company of Moroccan knights off to the edge of the battlefield. Then he placed himself at one side of the army, with Eudor, Duke of Gloucester, taking command of the other. He then led an assault upon the Saxons. The fighting was fierce, but slowly the Britons began to gain ground. Upon realizing this, Hengist attempted a retreat towards the castle of Caer Conan. Aurelius pressed the Saxons hard though, and they were unable to reach the castle. Therefore, Hengist held his ground and charged the Briton lines. The Saxon spirits were lifted, seeing their leader fight, and they held firm. The tide of battle began to turn, and now it was the Britons being pushed back. It was in this moment, though, that the Moroccan knights crashed into the flank of the Saxons. The Saxon line was broken, and they began to rout. In the chaos, Eudor made a dash forwards towards Hengist. He caught up with the Saxon chief and fought a bloody duel against him, eventually triumphing. He knocked Hengist unconscious and dragged his body across the battlefield, cheering on the Britons and urging them to hunt down all the remaining Saxons. After the battle, the Saxons were scattered in all directions, some retreating to their ships and returning to Germany, others into the forests to hide. The bulk of their forces gathered around the leadership of two men, Octa, the son of Hengist, and Eosa, his kinsman. Octa chose to retreat south to York, whilst Eosa travelled north to Alclad. Victorious, Aurelius spent 3 days at Caer Conan, burying the fallen and gathering his dukes around him. There they decided to execute Hengist. Duke Eudor brought the man outside of the city and beheaded him. Afterwards, Aurelius ordered that the man was to be buried, with a mound of earth heaped above his grave, as was the pagan custom. Once all was completed, Aurelius marched his forces east to deal with Octa in York. The city was soon besieged. Octa, seeing that he was greatly outnumbered by the invaders, sought a peace deal. Aurelius discussed what to do with the other British nobles, and the Bishop Eldad, a relative of Eudor, advised him to allow Octa and his Saxons to stay in Britain. He said that they should make them swear fealty to Aurelius, and then settle them in the north, along the border with Scotland. That area was sparsely populated, and it would help defend against invasions from the Picts. Aurelius accepted the advice, and soon Octa swore fealty to him. When Eosa heard of this, he requested that he should be receiving the same treatment from the king, and soon the whole remains of the Saxon army was being settled in the north. With his enemies defeated, Aurelius set about restoring order to the kingdom and returning it to normalcy after the ravages of the Saxons. He ordered that churches which had been destroyed be rebuilt, and return land to the Britons which had been stolen by the Saxons. He then toured the land, travelling south to London, then to Winchester, and then on to Salisbury, where the great Saxon treachery had previously occurred, leading to the deaths of hundreds of Briton nobles. He was greatly moved by what had happened there, and decided that he would go about building a memorial for the Britons who had died there. When pondering what this memorial should be, the wizard Merlin, who had been an advisor to Vortigern, came to him. Merlin explained that thousands of years ago, giants had brought many large stones north from Africa and built a circular stone structure with them in Ireland on the mountain of Calaris. He therefore suggested that these stones be brought to Britain and be placed at Salisbury in memory of the fallen Britons. Aurelius was taken with the idea, and so sent his brother Uther, along with Merlin and an army of Britons, on ships to retrieve these stones. Now, the king of Ireland at this time was a young man known as Gilliman, and when he heard of the Britons arriving, he gathered an army and travelled to meet them. However, When he learned that the Britons were here to collect stones, he laughed and mocked them, saying it was no wonder that the Saxons were able to lay waste to Britain, if the Britons were prone to such folly. He then forbade them from taking even a pebble from Ireland. Upon hearing this, Uther immediately led a charge and attacked the Irish. Being caught by surprise, the Irish army was quickly scattered, and they, along with their king, fled. The Britons then pushed forward to Mount Kilaris. When they got there, Merlin designed equipment which allowed the Britons to transport the stones back to the ships. Soon they were home again, and the stones were transported to Salisbury. There, the stone circle was reconstructed under Merlin's watch, and then a grand ceremony was carried out, attended by all the nobles of the realm, in memory of the Britons who had died there. However, whilst all this was going on, Pasentius, the son of Vortigern, who had fled the realm after his father's death, had been in Germany. There he had gathered an army around him, with the promise of lots of gold and silver, should they help him reclaim the throne of Britain. His fleet set sail, and when he landed, he faced Aurelius in battle, but was promptly defeated. Not willing to return to Germany, however, Pasentius instead sailed around to Ireland, where he met with King Gilliman. There, the two men forged an alliance and planned an invasion of Britain. Their fleet set sail and made for the city of Menevia. At this time, Aurelius had been struck with illness, and so was resting in Winchester. Therefore, he sent Uther to deal with them. Whilst Uther was on his way, a Saxon who spoke the language of the Britons came before Pasentius. His name was Eopa, and he claimed that he would be able to assassinate Aurelius, and asked what Pasentius would give him in return if he did just that. Pasentius offered to make the man a general in his army. Eopa agreed, and a deal was struck. Eopa then travelled to Winchester, where he disguised himself as a Briton and a monk. He claimed to be a healer, and after befriending some members of the king's household, he was brought before the king to attempt to heal him of his illness. There, Eopa gave the king a poison, claiming it was medicine, and Aurelius drank it. Soon after, he fell into a deep sleep. That night, an immense star shone over Winchester, so bright in fact that it was seen as far away as Gaul. When all saw it, they were stricken with wonder and fear as to what it could mean. When Uther saw it, it appeared to him as the head of a dragon, breathing a ray of fire. He asked Merlin as to what the cause of it was. Merlin observed the star and then declared that Aurelius, the king, was dead. He said, however, that Uther would defeat his enemies and become king of Britain, and then he would have a son who would go on to surpass all the Britons who had come before in terms of greatness. Uther doubted as to whether Merlin was telling the truth. However, he pressed on to Menevia, and there he did battle against Pasentius' army. As Merlin had foretold, the battle went decisively in Uther's favour, and both Pasentius and King Gilliman were slain. The remaining invaders retreated to their ships and sailed away. After his victory, Uther returned as quickly as he could to Winchester. On the way, he received messengers informing him of his brother's death. A funeral was held for Aurelius in Winchester, which was attended by many of the nobles and clergy. For his coronation, King Uther had 2 golden dragon statues made. One he gave to the local church, and for the other he made it into a standard for himself. From that day on, he was known as Uther Pendragon. Meanwhile, up north, with Aurelius dead, Octa and Eosa saw themselves free of the oaths they had made to the late king, and they now believed they were free to act as they pleased. Taking in the remnants of Pasentius' army, they sent messengers to Germany requesting reinforcements. Soon Octa had a large army at his command, and he occupied the north, marching as far south as York. Uther travelled north with an army to deal with them, and a battle took place. However, this time, the Saxons held firm, and the Britons were forced to retreat. Following up on their victory, the Saxons pursued the Britons to a nearby hill, where night fell. On the hill, Uther gathered his nobles around him and discussed ideas on how to defeat the Saxons. After some discussion, Duke Gorlois of Cornwall spoke up, and warned that if they waited until morning, the Saxons would have advantage in the daylight. Instead, he suggested they launch a night raid on the Saxon camp. The king agreed, and the Briton forces set out towards the Saxon camp at high speed. As they approached, some of the Saxon scouts spotted the army and sounded the alarm, but it was too late. As the Saxons woke from their sleep, the Britons were already upon them, and they were cut down. Some did mount a resistance, but they were too disorganized to achieve much. Soon the camp was overrun, and the remaining Saxons fled. The battle had gone decisively in Uther's favour, and both Uther and Uther were taken prisoner. After his victory, Uther pushed north to the city of Alclad, in the lands of the Picts. There he believed the Picts had been aiding the Saxons in their wars, and so he laid waste to the land, before heading back south to London. In London, Uther and Uther were imprisoned. It was near Easter at this point, and so grand celebrations were held in honour of the king's victories. Now at these festivals was Gorlois, the Duke of Cornwall, and his wife Egerna, who was known throughout the whole realm for her beauty. When Uther saw her, he fell in love with her at first sight. Ignoring the other festivities, Uther proceeded to spend as much time as possible with Egerna to try and win her favour. Soon Gorlois realised what was happening and was furious. He left London with his wife and returned to Cornwall. Annoyed at this, Uther issued a summons to Gorlois, demanding that he return to London. However, Gorlois refused. Now it was Uther's turn to be angry. He raised an army and marched on Cornwall, intent on crushing the Duke. Gorlois did not dare to face the king in the field, and so he held up in the castle of Tillamook and sent his messengers to Ireland, calling for aid. He then sent his wife to stay at the castle of Tintagel. When Uther entered Cornwall, he laid siege to the castle in which Gorlois was staying. Whilst he was there, he consulted Merlin about his love for Egerna. Merlin had a plan for just this moment, though. He used his magic to transform King Uther so that he looked identical to Duke Gorlois, and then sent the king to Tintagel, where Egerna was. When Uther arrived at the castle, he was thought to be the Duke and was allowed entry. Even Egerna fully believed that it was Gorlois and not Uther that was there. Uther then spent the night with Egerna, and they conceived a child. Meanwhile, at Tillamook, the king's soldiers decided that they would take it upon themselves to launch an assault on the castle. As they attacked, Gorlois and his men led a great charge against them. However, he was slain right at the beginning of combat. Seeing his death, his men lost hope, and they soon surrendered. The next morning, a messenger arrived at Tintagel, reporting of the death of Duke Gorlois. This caused great confusion, as it appeared Duke Gorlois was right there before them, alive and well. Uther spoke up, saying that he had come here after the fall of his castle, and now he intended to leave to negotiate with the king. With that, he left the castle, and on his way back to his own army, abandoned the disguise. He later returned to Tintagel with the army. He confirmed the duke's death and then married Egerna. It was not to be a happy marriage though, as Egerna had little love for the king. 9 months later, Egerna gave birth to a boy who was named Arthur. The couple had a second child at a later date as well, who was named Anna. For several years, there was a relative peace in the kingdom under Uther's rule. However, as he grew older, he began to suffer from frequent illnesses which drained his strength. Then one night, there was a breakout from the prisons of London. The Saxons, Uther and Uther, escaped and fled across the sea to Germany. There they spent a great time gathering a huge army of supporters around them, as well as putting a fleet together. After a few years, they were ready and set sail for Britain, intent on reconquering all the lands once held by Hengist. They made land in the north and immediately started raiding and putting cities to the torch. Lot, the Earl of Leicester, was given command of the army and was sent north to deal with them. Lot was a youthful knight of great prowess. He was also betrothed to the king's daughter Anna. He led an extensive campaign of skirmishing against the Saxons, but was unable to deal a decisive blow against them. With time, the morale of the Britons began to decline. They had previously taken pride in their victories over the Saxons, but the enthusiasm was quickly dropping. Now it was clear this would not be a quick war. The Saxons then started gaining victories themselves and pushed the Britons further south. King Uther was frustrated at the state of things. He took command of the army away from Lot and announced that he personally would lead the Britons to victory. However, by this time, his illness had grown much worse, and he had to be carried around in a litter by his men, so still not a good boost to morale for the Britons. With Uther now in command, the Britons marched on Verulam, where the Saxons were currently harassing the local folk. When Uther and Uther heard of the king's state, they disdained to fight him, as they said the king was already half dead. They withdrew to the city instead, leaving the gates open however, to show how little they feared Uther. As Uther arrived, he saw this and immediately ordered a full-scale attack on the city. The Britons charged, many through the gate, while others scaled the walls. The fighting was fierce, and soon the Saxons regretted underestimating the Britons. They fought valiantly to reclaim the walls and defend the city. Come night time, the attack of the Britons ended, and they retreated to their camp outside the walls. Then, in the early hours of the morning, Uther and Uther took the decision to attack the Britons head-on. The Saxons sallied forth from the city and met the Britons in battle. It was a brutal fight, with huge losses on each side. However, during the fighting, both Uther and Uther were slain, and after that, the Saxons lost hope and fled. Uther was overjoyed at the victory. He declared that he would rather conquer the Saxons as a half-dead king than be conquered by them and go on living at full health. For better is a death with honour than a life with shame. The remaining Saxons fled north, where they continued to raid and plunder the lands as they had been doing before. Uther was eager to pursue them. However, his advisors dissuaded him. In the days following the battle, he fell even sicker than before. He stayed at Merlin, hoping for a recovery. However, whilst the Saxons had been in the city, they had found a Briton man who was willing to betray his people when they had hired him. It was the habit of the king to prefer to drink from fresh water from the local spring in order to help with his illness, and this man secretly poisoned the spring one night. In the morning, the king drank water from the spring and soon fell dead in his room. When this treachery was discovered, the spring was covered up with a mound of earth, and Uther was laid to rest in a grave next to his brother. The people mourned the death of their king, and they looked uncertainly towards the future ahead. At the age of 15, the king's son, Arthur, would take the throne, and he would change the fate of the kingdom forever.